Okay, just going to try and, now that the scope is actually functional, I'm going to try and see if we can have ASCOM discover it, and we'll then be able to work out if we can get the scope to effectively report its position to the dome. So as we spin the scope around, we should be able to get the dome to spin as well. My recollection with GPS is that if it doesn't really know, if it hasn't worked out what the date and time is, like obviously I've just put those into the handbox, which was clearly not correct. It has no idea what satellites are even in the sky, so it takes quite a lot longer to find out what's going on. So maybe it's a matter of just leaving it on for a while. Okay, at this point we've discovered actually that the issue is that it has not found any satellites. Those coordinates are actually the default coordinates from the chip manufacturer, which works out to be somewhere in Tokyo. And the readings that have come back actually are suffering from a bug that was just came into effect in April this year, which is called the week 1024 bug, which basically means a patch needed to be released. So to accommodate some of these older GPS units that couldn't handle the rollover of its, well, I guess its 10-bit ability to calculate the week number for its time. So it's getting the year wrong. So what we need to do is work on applying the patch. So at this point, we've actually got a GPS reading that is accurate, and we can tell it's not the pre-canned stuff I had already pre-entered myself, because it's slightly different. So the patch has worked, and so we'll be able to move on to the next step. So we've installed the ASCOM driver for the dome and also the telescope. This is just showing that we've managed to physically get it hooked up and connected. It just works automatically it finds the driver that already exists, so it just talks to it through the API readily. So now that we've got the dome set up and the scope set up, we're going to configure ASCOM to run as a plain old telescope hub. The plain old telescope hub configuration of ASCOM is effectively kind of a hub that integrates multiple components and sort of rolls them into one interface. So we have a telescope, the dome, and the focuser, which in our case is still actually the telescope manages that driver. So what you want to do is just go and choose each scope, which I've each device, the scope, the dome, and the focuser. and synchronize them and plug them in. There's a difference in time because one of the settings is required is to leave the scope to not use daylight savings time, which I hadn't done at this point, but I did end up changing that back so that it doesn't report that error. I'm connecting to each of the devices. Want to make sure that we're getting all of those bits of information from the driver correctly and going and plugging those in, and make sure we go into the setup of each of the device, so the scope and the dome, to make sure that all of the parameters that relate to each of those is set up correctly. So you can see I've got the aperture and calculated the square meter aperture area, the focal length, all those kind of things. Make sure you put them on the driver. It helps in various reporting to software about what the telescope is actually doing and where it is and where it's pointing. And in addition, with the dome, the radius of the dome, so it knows how to calculate the various angles that it requires. Actually, you got to note in a couple of places in the various drivers, some of the measurements are actually in different units. So for example, focal length in this one is in meters, so it's 2.5. But in other screens, in different places, it's millimeters. So you've got to just pay attention and make sure everything is set correctly. Otherwise, you end up with some weird numbers coming through. What we can see here is the hub in its operating mode. We have the scope and dome connected, and we actually have the focus connected as well. So what we're going to do is make an attempt at moving the scope. So we're just going to slow it around, and then I'm going to slave the dome to it to see if the dome will move. So it does. It's trying to get the shutter opening around to where the scope is pointing. I don't think it's quite aligned at this point, but the general concept is working. I think that the problem is that we don't have a proper GPS location at this point, so it's got a few issues, but the two are talking to each other. We're getting a reading. So at this point, we're going to try and refine some of that so we can have a better feel for how it's working, and we can bump around the scope, and the dome will move with it. So this is what it looks like. We're slewing, and then the dome is moving. So it's reasonably close to where it needs to be. So it's good enough for us to play with and refine. So when we hook this up through SkyCharts with ASCOM plugged in, everything talks to each other. So we're going to do a slew from Saturn to Jupiter. And it now moves. Now obviously it's too early in the day to see, but that was actually successful. We're just going to shut down scope and the dome and park the scope. And I have everything connected as well on a remote Wi-Fi power board. It's internet controlled. So after everything physically shuts down, I can then get my phone up and shut down the actual power boards and shut down the power explicitly into the observatory, so things are not on wasting power. Or indeed with a dome, it stops it from operating at all. So that's what we do with that software. Also got another little camera in there that I can control from my phone as well.